I still remember the cold sting of the rejection email arriving on the tiny cracked screen of my outdated phone. After 30 years of cleaning spotless offices, organizing the lives of women dripping in diamonds and designer suits, not one, except one, ever truly saw me. They didn't see the woman I used to be. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. For years, every morning I took the subway from my cramped studio apartment in Queens. The scent of stale pretzels and hot dog carts mingled with the rumble of the city below. My back always ached by the time I reached the bronze towers of Manhattan. There I tidied offices for 30 wealthy women. Each polished desk was a mask of perfection. But I carried a weight of loneliness, invisibility, and exhaustion. My uniform was always the same. A navy blue dress with sensible shoes that squeaked against marble floors. I carried a small bag with cleaning supplies that smelled like lemon disinfectant. The weight of that bag grew heavier each year. Not because of what was inside, but because of what I carried in my heart. One afternoon last spring, I waited for a message from my daughter. A simple, Happy Mother's Day, text. But my phone stayed silent. The bustling noise of NYC outside was a harsh contrast to the deafening void inside my heart. I clutched an old photo of me, 30 years younger. Vibrant and full of dreams. That woman felt like a stranger now. In that photo, I wore a yellow sundress. My hair was thick and dark. My smile reached my eyes. I was standing in front of our first apartment in Brooklyn. My husband's arm was around my waist. My children, small then, giggled at my feet. We looked like happiness itself. But looking at it now, I wondered if even then, I was already disappearing. The office buildings of Manhattan stretched toward heaven like fingers grasping for something just out of reach. I spent my days in those towers. Cleaning conference rooms where million-dollar deals were made. Dusting portraits of men in expensive suits. Wiping fingerprints from windows that overlooked Central Park. Mrs. Henderson's office was on the 42nd floor. She was a lawyer who wore Hermes scarves and spoke in clipped sentences. I cleaned her office every Tuesday and Friday. For 3 years, she never looked directly at me. Not once. I was furniture to her. Moving furniture that happened to make her space sparkle. Mrs. Chen owned a marketing firm. Her office smelled like vanilla candles and ambition. She had photos of her family on every surface. Vacations in Europe. Graduation ceremonies. Wedding photos. I dusted each frame carefully. Sometimes I lingered, wondering what it felt like to have so much joy displayed so openly. There was Mrs. Rodriguez who ran an investment company. She kept fresh orchids on her windowsill. Purple ones that reminded me of the flowers my mother used to grow in our tiny backyard in Queens. When I watered those orchids, for just a moment, I felt connected to something beautiful. But none of them saw me. Not really. I was Margaret to them. Sometimes just the cleaning lady. I heard them on phone calls discussing their children's prestigious colleges. Their summer homes in the Hamptons. Their husbands' promotions. I listened while I emptied trash cans filled with expensive takeout containers and designer tissue boxes. My own life felt small in comparison. My studio apartment had one window that looked out onto an alley. My view was a brick wall covered in graffiti that changed every few weeks. Sometimes the art was beautiful. Sometimes it was angry. Always it was real in a way that those polished offices never were. The subway ride home each evening was my time to think. Pressed between tired commuters, I would close my eyes and remember who I used to be. Before the divorce. Before my children grew up and grew distant. Before I became invisible. I used to be a teacher. Did you know that? I taught second grade at PS 84 in Queens for 12 years. I had a classroom filled with bright bulletin boards and children's laughter. I wore colorful sweaters and read stories with different voices for each character. Parents thanked me at conferences. Children hugged my legs in the hallway. But when my marriage fell apart, I needed more money. Teaching didn't pay enough for rent and groceries and my children's needs. So I took evening cleaning jobs. 1 became 2. 2 became 5. Before I knew it, I had left teaching entirely. My ex-husband, Robert, used to tell me I was wasting my education. "You have a college degree, Margaret," he'd say. "This is beneath you." But when the bills piled up and he disappeared, those cleaning jobs were what kept us afloat. My children never understood. Sarah, my daughter, was embarrassed when her friends asked what her mother did for work. "My mom cleans offices," she would mumble, looking at her shoes. Michael, my son, at least tried to be supportive. "It's honest work, Mom," he'd say. But I could hear the pity in his voice. The years blurred together like stations on the express train. Cleaning became my identity. I forgot about the teacher I used to be. The woman who had opinions and dreams and a classroom full of children who thought she was wonderful. Do you know what it feels like to watch your own life shrink? To feel yourself becoming smaller and smaller until you're practically invisible? That's what happened to me. Day by day. Year by year. I remember the morning everything started to change. It was a Thursday in March. The kind of day when winter hasn't quite let go but spring is whispering promises. I was cleaning Mrs. Patterson's office on the 38th floor. She was a real estate mogul with silver hair always pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River. Her desk was mahogany, bigger than my entire kitchen table. Fresh white roses sat in a crystal vase. Everything gleamed. I was dusting her bookshelf when I found it. A folder that had fallen behind her law books. As I reached to retrieve it, some papers scattered to the floor. I bent to collect them, not meaning to look. But one document caught my eye. It was a background check. On me. My hands trembled as I read. Margaret Elena Santos. Former teacher. Currently employed as office cleaner. No criminal background. References satisfactory. But what shocked me wasn't the information. It was the date. The check was from 6 months ago. She had someone investigate me. After 3 years of cleaning her office, she finally wanted to know who I was. But she still didn't ask me directly. She hired a private investigator. I felt something crack inside my chest. Like ice breaking on a frozen pond. This woman had spent more money finding out about me than she paid me in a month. But she had never once looked me in the eye and asked my name. I finished cleaning her office in silence. The roses seemed to mock me with their perfect white petals. The river outside looked cold and gray. When I left that day, I knew something had shifted. I just didn't know what yet. The subway ride home felt longer than usual. I kept thinking about that background check. About being investigated like a suspect instead of simply being asked like a human being. The train car was crowded, but I felt utterly alone. When I got to my apartment, I made tea in my favorite mug. It was chipped and faded, a souvenir from a long-ago trip to Niagara Falls. I sat by my small window and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. Hurt, yes. Angry, definitely. But underneath it all was something else. A kind of awakening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the offices I cleaned. All the women who employed me but never truly saw me. I wondered if any of them had bothered to learn my story. Did they know I used to inspire children? Did they care that I had dreams once? I got up and opened the drawer where I kept my old things. Photo albums. Letters. My teaching certificates. Evidence of the life I had lived before cleaning became my world. I spread them out on my small table and remembered. Here was a photo from my first classroom. 22 bright faces smiling at the camera. I was young then, maybe 25. My hair was long and I wore a bright blue dress. I looked confident. Happy. Alive. There was a letter from a parent, thanking me for helping her son learn to read. Mrs. Santos, it said, you changed his life. He comes home excited about books now. You are a gift. When was the last time someone had called me a gift? I found my college diploma, yellowed with age. Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education. Magna cum laude. I had been proud then. I had worked 2 jobs to pay for school, studying late into the night at the library. I graduated with honors and a head full of dreams. What had happened to that woman? The next morning, I woke up different. I can't explain it exactly. It was like I had been sleeping for years and suddenly opened my eyes. I got dressed for work, but I looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual. Really looked. I saw tired eyes and graying hair. I saw worry lines and shoulders that stooped from years of bending over other people's messes. But I also saw something else. I saw Margaret Elena Santos. The teacher. The woman who had once commanded a classroom and inspired young minds. She was still in there. Buried under years of invisibility and exhaustion. But still there. On the subway that morning, instead of closing my eyes and disappearing into my thoughts, I looked around. Really looked at the other passengers. The woman across from me was reading a paperback novel, completely absorbed. The man next to me was sketching in a notepad. Everyone had a story. Everyone was more than what they appeared to be on the surface. Just like me. I arrived at the Chrysler Building that day with something new in my step. I was still Margaret the cleaning lady. But I was also Margaret the teacher. Margaret the college graduate. Margaret the woman with a story worth telling. Mrs. Patterson's office was my first stop. As I cleaned, I thought about that background check. About being investigated instead of invited to share my story. The injustice of it burned in my chest like heartburn that wouldn't go away. But here's what I realized as I polished her windows. She had gotten her information wrong. The background check said I was currently employed as office cleaner. As if that was all I was. As if my past didn't matter. As if my dreams and education and experience had been erased by a mop and bucket. I was more than my current job. I had always been more. The day continued like any other. I cleaned Mrs. Chen's marketing firm. I watered Mrs. Rodriguez's orchids. I emptied trash cans and wiped down conference tables. But inside, I was changing. During my lunch break, I sat in Bryant Park behind the New York Public Library. It was one of my favorite spots in the city. Trees and grass in the middle of all that concrete. People playing chess and reading books and just being human. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I Googled myself. Margaret Elena Santos, teacher. A few results came up. An old article about my classroom winning a reading challenge. A mention in a school newsletter about a science fair project. Small things. But proof that I had once been someone who mattered professionally. I thought about Mrs. Patterson and her background check. About all the wealthy women whose offices I cleaned. About how they saw me as just a service, not a person. And I made a decision. I was going to start telling my story. Not to them, necessarily. They might never be ready to hear it. But to myself. And maybe to others who felt invisible like I did. That evening, after work, I stopped at the library branch near my apartment. I hadn't been inside in years. The librarian, a kind woman with gray curls, smiled when I approached the desk. I used to be a teacher, I told her. I'd like to volunteer to help with literacy programs. She lit up. We always need experienced educators. When can you start? Just like that. No background check. No investigation. Just recognition of what I had to offer. I started volunteering the following week. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, after my cleaning jobs, I would go to the library. I helped adults who were learning to read. Some were immigrants whose first language wasn't English. Others had dropped out of school young and were trying to get their GED. They looked at me with respect. With gratitude. They called me Teacher Margaret, and when they said it, I stood a little taller. One of my students was a woman named Elena. She was about my age, from El Salvador, working 2 jobs to support her grandchildren. She had been cleaning offices too, just like me. But she had never learned to read English well. I feel stupid sometimes, she told me one evening as we worked through a picture book together. You are not stupid, I said firmly. You are brave. It takes courage to learn something new. As I said those words to her, I realized I was saying them to myself too. Working with Elena and the other students reminded me of who I had been. Who I still was, underneath all those years of feeling invisible. I was someone who could make a difference. Someone who had knowledge worth sharing. But the most important change was still to come. It happened on an ordinary Friday in April. I was cleaning the office of Mrs. Victoria Ashford, a woman who ran a non-profit foundation. Her office was different from the others. Instead of cold marble and chrome, it was warm. Wooden furniture and soft lighting. Photos that seemed to tell stories rather than just display status. I had been cleaning her office for about 2 years. She was politer than most. She would nod when she saw me and sometimes say good morning. But like all the others, she had never really seen me. That Friday, I was watering the plants on her windowsill when she walked in unexpectedly. Usually she was at lunch during my cleaning time. But there she was, carrying takeout from a deli downstairs. Those philodendrons look much healthier since you started caring for them, she said. I was so surprised that someone had noticed, I almost dropped the watering can. Thank you, ma'am. Please, call me Victoria. And you're Margaret, right? She knew my name. After 2 years, she knew my name. Yes, ma'am. Victoria. The name felt strange on my tongue. She sat down at her desk and started unpacking her lunch. A turkey sandwich and a cup of soup that smelled like chicken broth and home. Have you worked in cleaning long? It was a simple question. The kind of question anyone might ask. But no one had ever asked me before. I could have given the simple answer. The one that wouldn't complicate things or take too much of her time. About 15 years, I could have said. Instead, I heard myself saying, I used to be a teacher. Victoria looked up from her soup. Really looked at me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. What grade? She asked. Second. I taught at PS 84 in Queens for 12 years. What made you change careers? The question was asked gently. Without judgment. With genuine curiosity. And suddenly, I found myself telling her everything. About the divorce. About needing more money. About how cleaning jobs became my life and teaching became my past. About feeling invisible for so many years. Victoria listened. Really listened. She asked questions about my students, about what I had loved about teaching, about whether I missed it. I do miss it, I admitted. I miss feeling like I was making a difference. But you are making a difference, she said. Look around this office. It's a place where we can focus on our mission because you take care of all the details that allow us to do our work. That's important too. I had never thought about it that way. We talked for almost an hour. She told me about her foundation, which provided scholarships for adult learners. She told me about her own path, how she had started as a social worker and built the organization from nothing. When I finally left her office that day, I felt different. Lighter somehow. For the first time in years, someone had been curious about my story. Someone had seen Margaret the teacher, not just Margaret the cleaning lady. The weekend passed quietly, but I couldn't stop thinking about my conversation with Victoria. It had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. A sense of possibility. Monday morning came, and I went about my usual routine. Subway to Manhattan. First office at 8:30. But everything felt different now. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was paying attention. At Mrs. Henderson's law firm, I noticed things I had overlooked before. The law books on her shelves included several about education law. There was a photo tucked behind her computer monitor of what looked like a school graduation ceremony. At Mrs. Chen's marketing office, I saw that one of her campaigns was for a literacy program. The materials were spread across her conference table. Bright, colorful designs encouraging adults to return to school. These women weren't just wealthy executives in designer suits. They had interests, passions, connections to education. If they had bothered to ask about my background, we might have found common ground. But they had never asked. The realization didn't make me angry anymore. It made me sad. Sad for all the connections that had never been made. All the conversations that had never happened. All the ways we had remained strangers when we could have been so much more. That Tuesday evening at the library, I told Elena about my conversation with Victoria. She asked about your teaching? Elena's English was getting better every week. Her excitement came through clearly. She did. And she actually listened to the answer. That's how it should be, Elena said firmly. Everyone has a story worth hearing. Elena was right. Everyone did have a story worth hearing. Including me. I started to think about all the stories that surrounded me every day. Not just the wealthy women whose offices I cleaned, but everyone. The security guards in the building lobbies who nodded good morning. The other cleaning staff who worked different floors. The cab drivers and subway operators and deli workers who made the city function. We were all more than our jobs. We all had histories and dreams and experiences that mattered. The following Friday, I was back in Victoria's office. This time, I was prepared when she came in during my cleaning time. Margaret, she said warmly. How was your week? We talked again. She told me about a grant proposal she was writing. I told her about my students at the library, how proud I was of their progress. You know, she said thoughtfully, our foundation is always looking for experienced educators to help with our programs. Would you be interested in hearing more about it? My heart started racing. What kind of programs? We run evening classes for adult learners. Basic literacy, GED prep, English as a second language. The pay isn't much, but it's meaningful work. Teaching again. The possibility hung in the air between us like an answered prayer. I would love to hear more, I managed to say. Victoria smiled and handed me a business card. Not for her foundation, but for the education director, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez. Call her next week. Tell her I recommended you. And Margaret? She paused at her office door. Bring your teaching credentials when you meet with her. My teaching credentials. I hadn't looked at them in years except for that night when I spread out my old life on the kitchen table. But I had kept them. Somewhere deep down, I had kept them for a reason. That weekend, I dug through my closet until I found the folder with my certificates and transcripts. My bachelor's degree. My teaching license, expired but renewable. Letters of recommendation from principals and parents. Evidence of who I had been. Who I could be again. I called Carmen Rodriguez first thing Monday morning. Victoria spoke highly of you, Carmen said. Her voice was warm over the phone. When can you come in for an interview? An interview. For a teaching position. After 15 years of cleaning offices. We scheduled it for the following Wednesday, during the day. I would have to take time off from my cleaning route, but this felt important enough to risk it. Wednesday morning, I put on my best dress. Navy blue with small white flowers. I had worn it to my daughter's college graduation 3 years ago. It still fit, though it was a little snug around the waist. I took the subway to the foundation's offices in Midtown. Not to clean this time. To interview. To be seen as a professional again. Carmen Rodriguez was a woman about my age with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her office was small but welcoming, with books everywhere and photos of students on the walls. Tell me about your teaching experience, she said after we exchanged pleasantries. So I did. I told her about P.S. 84, about my second graders who struggled with reading until suddenly the letters made sense and their faces lit up with understanding. I told her about parent conferences where mothers cried with gratitude because their children finally loved school. I told her about bulletin boards and science fairs and the pure joy of watching young minds grow. Carmen listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about my methods and philosophy. For the first time in years, I felt like an educator again. Like someone whose experience and knowledge mattered. Why did you leave teaching? She asked gently. I told her about the divorce, about needing more money than the school district could pay. About how temporary cleaning jobs became permanent when life kept demanding more than I could afford to give. But you never stopped being a teacher, did you? Carmen said. Victoria told me about your volunteer work at the library. She was right. Even when I was invisible in those office buildings, even when I felt forgotten and overlooked, I had found ways to teach. Ways to matter. We have an opening for an evening instructor in our basic literacy program, Carmen said. It's part-time, 3 nights a week. The pay is modest, but there are opportunities for growth. Would you be interested? Would I be interested in teaching again? In mentoring again? In being seen for who I really was? Yes, I said. Very much yes. Carmen smiled. Welcome back to education, Margaret. Welcome back to education. Welcome back to myself. I started the new position 2 weeks later. 3 evenings a week, after finishing my cleaning route, I would take the subway to the Foundation's Learning Center in Chelsea. The classroom was small but bright, with windows that looked out onto the busy street below. I arranged the desks in a circle so everyone could see each other. I put up a bulletin board with encouraging quotes and student work. It felt like coming home. My first class had 8 students. Adults ranging in age from 22 to 67. Some were immigrants like Elena. Others were people who had dropped out of school decades ago and were trying to start fresh. All of them were brave. All of them had stories. There was Marcus, a 50-year-old man who had been incarcerated for 15 years and was learning to read so he could write letters to his daughter. There was Rosa, a grandmother who cleaned hotels during the day and wanted to help her grandchildren with their homework. There was David, a young veteran who struggled with reading because of a learning disability that had never been properly diagnosed. Each of them looked at me with the same expression I remembered from my second graders 20 years ago. Hope mixed with fear. The desire to learn battling with the terror of failure. Learning is not about being perfect, I told them on the first night. It's about being brave enough to try. As the weeks went by, I watched them grow. Marcus read his first complete story aloud, his voice shaking with pride. Rosa successfully helped her grandson with a book report. David discovered strategies that helped him process letters and words more easily. And I grew too. Each small victory reminded me of why I had become a teacher in the first place. Not for the money or the recognition, but for those moments when understanding dawns in someone's eyes. When knowledge becomes power. When learning becomes hope. But the most profound change was how I saw myself during my cleaning jobs. I was still Margaret the cleaning lady. But now I was also Margaret the teacher again. The two identities didn't cancel each other out. They both mattered. Victoria noticed the difference immediately. You're glowing, she said one Friday afternoon when I was watering her plants. I'm teaching again, I told her. Thanks to you. No, thanks to you. I just opened a door. You had the courage to walk through it. She was right. For too many years, I had waited for someone else to see my worth, to recognize my value, to invite me to matter. But the truth was, I had to claim my own worth first. I continued cleaning offices during the day and teaching at night. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I was living fully. Using all of who I was. Some of my cleaning clients started to notice the change in me. Not Victoria, who had seen me all along, but others. Mrs. Chen commented that I seemed more energetic. Mrs. Rodriguez asked if I was taking vitamins because I looked healthier. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had never acknowledged my existence beyond a polite nod, said good morning with what might have been genuine warmth. It wasn't that they suddenly saw me differently. It was that I saw myself differently, and that change was impossible to hide. But the real test of my transformation was still to come. It happened on a Tuesday in late October. Halloween decorations filled the city, orange and black reminders that sometimes we all wear masks. I was cleaning Mrs. Patterson's office, the woman who had run the background check on me months earlier. She came in unexpectedly while I was organizing her bookshelf. The same shelf where I had found the folder that changed everything. Margaret, she said, and I was surprised she knew my name. Could I speak with you for a moment? My heart started racing. Had she noticed that I had seen the background check? Was I in trouble? Of course, Mrs. Patterson. She sat behind her enormous desk and gestured for me to take a seat across from her. I had cleaned this office for years, but I had never sat in one of her chairs. The leather was soft and expensive. I understand you've been working with the Ashford Foundation, she said. Victoria must have mentioned it to her. The wealthy women in these buildings all knew each other, moved in the same circles. Yes, ma'am. I teach evening classes there. Victoria speaks very highly of your work. She mentioned that you have an educational background. Here it was. The moment I had been imagining for months. She was finally asking about my background, but only because someone else had told her I was worth asking about. I was a teacher for 12 years before I started cleaning offices, I said. Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about hiring someone to help with educational outreach for our firm. We do a lot of pro bono work with schools, but we need someone who understands that world from the inside. She was offering me a job. After 3 years of cleaning her office, never seeing me as anything more than hired help, she was suddenly interested in my professional expertise. The old Margaret would have been grateful. Thrilled, even. Someone was finally recognizing her worth. But I had changed. I had learned that my worth didn't depend on other people's recognition. It existed whether they saw it or not. That sounds like an interesting opportunity, I said carefully. But I'm very committed to my current teaching position. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised. She wasn't used to people turning down her offers, even conditionally. This would pay significantly more than part-time teaching, she said. And it would be more prestigious. More prestigious than teaching adults to read? More prestigious than helping people transform their lives through education? I thought about Marcus, who could now read bedtime stories to his daughter during their weekly phone calls. About Rosa, who had passed her citizenship test the week before. About David, who was thinking about going to college. Mrs. Patterson, I said, and my voice was steady and clear, teaching is the most prestigious work I can imagine. It's what I was meant to do. She stared at me for a long moment. I don't think anyone had ever called teaching prestigious in her presence before. Well, she said finally. If you change your mind, the offer stands. Thank you. I appreciate that. As I left her office that day, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I had chosen myself. I had chosen meaning over money, purpose over prestige. I had chosen to be fully who I was instead of trying to become who others thought I should be. The wealthy women in those Manhattan towers might never fully see me. They might continue to think of me as Margaret the cleaning lady who also taught on the side. But it didn't matter anymore. I saw myself. And that was enough. The teaching program at the foundation continued to grow. Carmen promoted me to lead instructor, which came with a small raise and the opportunity to design curriculum. I developed a program specifically for working adults, with flexible scheduling and practical applications. More students joined the classes. More lives were changed. More people discovered that learning was possible at any age, in any circumstance. I still cleaned offices 3 days a week. The income helped, and honestly, I had grown to love the quiet, meditative nature of the work. There was satisfaction in transforming chaos into order, in making spaces more beautiful and functional. But now cleaning was just part of what I did, not all of who I was. Victoria continued to be a source of support and encouragement. She had become more than a client, she was a friend. We would have coffee together sometimes after my teaching classes, talking about education and philanthropy and the ways we could make the world a little bit better. You know, she said one evening as we sat in a small cafe in Chelsea, I've been thinking about what happened with Mrs. Patterson. About her job offer. What about it? She's not a bad person, Margaret. None of them are, really. They're just limited. They move in such narrow circles that they forget there are other ways to measure worth. Victoria was generous in her assessment. More generous than I might have been. Maybe, I said. But I think we all have a responsibility to see beyond the surface. To be curious about the people around us. You're right. And that's exactly what makes you such a good teacher. You see potential in everyone. It was true. I did see potential in everyone. Including myself, finally. As winter settled over New York, bringing shorter days and longer nights, I found myself reflecting on all the changes in my life. A year ago, I had been invisible. Tired. Going through the motions of existence without really living. Now I was living fully. Teaching, learning, growing. Connected to purpose and meaning in ways I had forgotten were possible. My relationship with my own children had improved too, though slowly. Sarah called more often, and when she asked about my work, I could tell her about teaching as well as cleaning. There was pride in her voice when she told friends that her mother was an educator again. Michael visited for Christmas, bringing his wife and 2 young children. My grandchildren played with blocks on the floor while we talked, and I found myself telling them the same stories I told my adult literacy students. Stories about the power of words, the magic of reading, the joy of discovery. "You seem different, Mom," Michael said as he was leaving. "Happier." "I'm doing work that matters," I told him. "That makes all the difference." As I closed the door behind them, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was still tired sometimes, still showed the wear of years of hard work. But her eyes were bright. Her smile was real. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. Spring came early that year, filling the city with the sound of birds and the smell of new growth. I had been teaching at the foundation for almost a year, and the program had become one of their most successful initiatives. Carmen called me into her office on a warm day in April. "Margaret, we've received a grant to expand the literacy program," she said. "We want to offer daytime classes as well as evening ones, and we need a full-time director." A full-time position. Benefits. The opportunity to build something even bigger and more impactful. "We want to offer the position to you," Carmen continued. "You've proven that you understand our mission, and the students respond to you beautifully." I thought about the implications. I would have to give up my cleaning jobs, the work that had sustained me for 15 years. It felt scary and exhilarating at the same time. "What would the salary be?" I asked. Carmen named a figure that was less than I made combining cleaning and teaching, but not by much. And it came with health insurance, something I hadn't had in years. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I spent the weekend walking through my neighborhood in Queens, thinking about the decision. The streets I had known for decades seemed different somehow. Not because they had changed, but because I had. I thought about the wealthy women whose offices I had cleaned for so many years. Most of them still didn't really see me, even now. They were polite, professional, but distant. Except for Victoria, who had opened a door I didn't even know existed. I thought about my students, who looked at me with respect and gratitude. Who called me Teacher Margaret and meant it with their whole hearts. I thought about the potential for growth, for reaching even more people, for building something that could outlast me. By Monday morning, I knew my answer. "I'll take the position," I told Carmen. She smiled broadly. "I was hoping you'd say that. When can you start?" "I need to give notice to my cleaning clients." 2 weeks. Perfect. Giving notice was harder than I expected. Not because I loved the work, but because it meant closing a chapter of my life that had lasted 15 years. Mrs. Henderson barely looked up when I told her. "We'll find someone else," she said dismissively. Mrs. Chen was more gracious. "Good for you, Margaret. Teaching suits you better than cleaning." Mrs. Rodriguez actually seemed sad to see me go. "You took such good care of my orchids," she said. "Will you teach the new person how to care for them?" But it was Victoria's response that moved me most. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "You're going to change so many lives." "You changed mine first," I told her. "By seeing me. Really seeing me." Victoria hugged me goodbye, something none of my other clients had ever done. "Stay in touch," she said. "I want to hear about all the wonderful things you're going to do." My last day of cleaning was a Friday in early May. The city was in full bloom, trees heavy with green leaves and flowers brightening every corner. I took the subway to Manhattan one last time as Margaret the cleaning lady. I cleaned each office with extra care that day, wanting to leave them spotless for whoever came next. I watered Mrs. Rodriguez's orchids one final time, whispering a little prayer that they would continue to thrive. When I left Mrs. Patterson's office for the last time, I paused at the bookshelf where I had found that background check almost a year and a half ago. The folder was gone, of course. But I wasn't the same woman who had discovered it. That woman had been invisible, undervalued, forgotten. This woman, the one leaving the office for the last time, was visible, valued, remembered. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of small changes, tiny acts of courage, gradual recognition of my own worth. But it had happened. As I walked out of the office building and into the busy street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. My first day as director of the literacy program was everything I had hoped it would be and more. The foundation had given me a real office, with a window and a bookshelf and a desk that was entirely mine. I put up photos of my students, past and present, and a small sign that said, "Every student deserves to be seen." The program grew rapidly under my direction. We added morning classes for seniors, afternoon sessions for parents of young children, weekend workshops for specific skills like job applications and computer literacy. Each class was different, but they all shared one thing: students who had been overlooked, undervalued, or forgotten by the world around them. Students who, like me, had stories worth hearing and potential worth nurturing. There was Janet, a 70-year-old woman who had never learned to read because she grew up in poverty and went to work at 14. There was Carlos, a construction worker who wanted to read books to his newborn daughter. There was Patricia, a former drug addict who was rebuilding her life one word at a time. They all looked at me with the same expression I had worn for so many years. The expression of someone who wasn't sure they mattered, who wasn't sure they were worthy of attention and care. You matter, I told each of them. Your dreams matter. Your efforts matter. You matter. I said it because I believed it. And I believed it because I had finally learned it was true about myself. The program's success attracted attention from the city's Department of Education. They invited me to speak at conferences about adult literacy. Newspapers wrote articles about our innovative approaches. Other foundations called asking for advice about starting similar programs. Suddenly, I was Margaret Elena Santos, Literacy Director. Margaret Elena Santos, Education Consultant. Margaret Elena Santos, Conference Speaker. The recognition was gratifying, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered most was the moment when a student read their first complete sentence. When someone passed their GED exam. When a grandmother could finally help her grandchildren with their homework. What mattered most was the light in their eyes when they realized they could learn, they could grow, they could become more than they had ever imagined possible. 1 year later, on the anniversary of my promotion, Carmen called me into her office again. Margaret, we've been asked to submit a proposal for a statewide adult literacy initiative, she said. It would mean expanding the program to 5 cities across New York. We want you to head it up. A statewide program. Hundreds of students. Dozens of teachers. The opportunity to impact lives across an entire state. It would mean more travel, more responsibility, Carmen continued. But also more resources, more staff, more influence. What do you think? What did I think? I thought about the woman who had cleaned offices for 15 years, invisible and undervalued. I thought about the teacher who had given up her dreams for practical necessities. I thought about all the students who were still out there, waiting for someone to see their potential. I think, I said, that it sounds like the opportunity of a lifetime. 6 months later, I stood in front of a conference room full of education officials, foundation representatives, and community leaders from across New York State. I was presenting the proposal for the New York Adult Literacy Initiative. Education is not just about skills, I told them. It's about dignity. It's about hope. It's about seeing people for who they really are, not just what they appear to be on the surface. I talked about Marcus, who is now a peer tutor in our program, helping other formerly incarcerated individuals learn to read. I talked about Rosa, who had become a citizenship class instructor. I talked about David, who was studying to become a learning disabilities advocate. These students didn't just learn to read, I said. They learned that they mattered. That their dreams were worth pursuing. That it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. The room was quiet when I finished. Then, slowly, applause began. Not polite conference applause, but genuine appreciation. Several people had tears in their eyes. The proposal was approved unanimously. As I left the conference room that day, I thought about all the wealthy women whose offices I had cleaned. Most of them had never bothered to learn my story, had never seen beyond the surface of what I appeared to be. But one had. Victoria had been curious enough to ask questions, generous enough to listen to the answers, and wise enough to see potential where others saw only a service provider. One person seeing you clearly can change everything. Now I was in a position to be that person for others. To see clearly, to ask questions, to recognize potential in unlikely places. The New York Adult Literacy Initiative launched the following fall. We opened programs in Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers. Each site was staffed with teachers who understood that education was about more than curriculum, it was about transformation. I traveled constantly in those first months, training staff, meeting with community leaders, visiting classrooms. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Every day brought new stories of students discovering their own worth, their own potential. In Buffalo, I met a 65-year-old man who had worked in steel mills his entire life and was learning to read so he could understand his medical records. In Rochester, I worked with a young mother who was studying for her GED while her baby slept in a carrier beside her desk. Each story reminded me of my own journey. Of the importance of being seen, being valued, being given a chance to become who you're meant to be. The program's success led to national recognition. I was invited to speak at conferences in Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta. Education Week wrote a feature article about our approach. The Department of Education asked me to consult on federal adult literacy initiatives. It was surreal sometimes, standing at podiums in hotel ballrooms, speaking to audiences of hundreds of people. 5 years earlier, I had been invisible. Now my voice was being heard across the country. But success brought its own challenges. The more recognition the program received, the more demands there were on my time. Interviews with journalists, meetings with politicians, conference presentations and strategy sessions and fundraising events. I was traveling 3 weeks out of every month, living in hotels and airports. I was making more money than I had ever dreamed possible, but I was also more exhausted than I had been even during my cleaning days. The work was meaningful, but the pace was unsustainable. I began to worry that I was losing touch with what had drawn me to education in the first place, the direct connection with students, the daily moments of discovery and growth. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings in Washington, D.C., I called Victoria from my hotel room. We had stayed in touch over the years, and she had become one of my closest friends. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," I told her. "The program is successful, but I feel like I'm losing myself in all the administrative work and public speaking." "What would feel right?" Victoria asked. It was such a simple question, but it stopped me cold. "What would feel right?" "Being in classrooms," I said immediately. "Working directly with students. Teaching." "Then do that." "But the program needs leadership. There are budgets and staff and government contracts. The program needs good leadership," Victoria interrupted. "That doesn't necessarily mean it needs you to do everything. You've built something wonderful, Margaret. Now trust others to help you sustain it." She was right, of course. I had been so focused on growing the program that I had forgotten to grow the people who could help run it. Over the next year, I restructured my role. I hired regional directors for each city, experienced educators who could handle the day-to-day operations. I created mentorship programs so successful teachers could train new ones. I built systems that could function well without constant oversight. And I carved out time to teach again. Not full-time, the program still needed strategic leadership, but regularly enough to stay connected to the students who were the heart of everything we did. 2 evenings a week, I taught basic literacy classes at our Manhattan site. It was the same building where I had started teaching 5 years earlier, though the program had grown to fill 3 floors instead of one small classroom. My students were different now, new faces, new stories, but their needs were the same. They needed to be seen. They needed to be valued. They needed someone to believe in their potential even when they couldn't believe in it themselves. There was Maria, a hotel housekeeper who reminded me of my earlier self. She worked long hours cleaning rooms for wealthy guests who never bothered to learn her name. She came to class tired but determined, dreaming of opening her own business someday. "I don't think I'm smart enough," she told me during one of our sessions. "You're smart enough to work full-time and still come to classes twice a week," I replied. "You're smart enough to dream of a better future and take steps to make it happen. You're definitely smart enough to learn whatever you set your mind to." I saw her shoulders straighten a little. Saw the spark of possibility in her eyes. It was the same transformation I had experienced myself, and it never got old. There was also James, a 72-year-old man who had dropped out of school in 3rd grade to help support his family during the Depression. He was learning to read because he wanted to write his memoirs for his great-grandchildren. "I have so many stories," he told me. "But I can't write them down if I can't read them back." We worked together on phonics and sight words, but also on the basics of storytelling. How to organize thoughts. How to find the emotional truth in memory. How to make words come alive on the page. When James read his first complete paragraph aloud, a description of his childhood home in rural Georgia, there wasn't a dry eye in the classroom. These moments, these small daily miracles of human growth and connection, reminded me why I had become a teacher in the first place. Not for recognition or career advancement, but for the profound privilege of witnessing people discover their own potential. 7 years after that first conversation with Victoria in her office, I was invited to the White House. The president was hosting an event to recognize innovative education programs, and our adult literacy initiative had been chosen as one of 12 programs nationwide to receive special recognition. I wore my best suit, navy blue with small white flowers, and took the train to Washington. As I walked through the halls of the White House, I marveled at how far I had come from that cramped studio apartment in Queens. But what struck me most wasn't the grandeur of the setting. It was how many of the other honorees had stories similar to mine. Teachers who had started as paraprofessionals. Social workers who had grown up in poverty. Researchers who had been overlooked because of their gender or ethnicity. All of us had been invisible at some point. All of us had been underestimated. And all of us had found ways to transform that experience into something meaningful and impactful. When the president shook my hand and said, "Thank you for the work you're doing," I thought about all the students who had trusted me with their dreams. All the teachers who had joined the program and shared their expertise. All the communities that had welcomed our services. "Thank you for recognizing that this work matters," I replied. Because it did matter. Every student who learned to read mattered. Every person who discovered they were capable of more than they imagined mattered. Every moment of connection between teacher and student mattered. The recognition was gratifying, but it wasn't why I did the work. I did the work because 15 years of feeling invisible had taught me how precious it is to be seen. How transformative it can be to have someone believe in your potential. I did the work because I knew there were thousands of people like me, like Maria and James and Marcus and Rosa, who were more than they appeared to be on the surface. Who had stories worth hearing and dreams worth supporting. After the White House ceremony, I flew back to New York and went directly to the Foundation's offices. It was evening by the time I arrived, and my Tuesday night class was just getting started. I slipped into the back of the classroom and watched the current instructor, a young woman named Jennifer who had been one of my first hires, work with a group of new students. She was patient and encouraging, creating the same kind of safe space for learning that I tried to create in all my classes. One of the students, an older gentleman with calloused hands and shy eyes, was struggling with a simple sentence. Jennifer knelt beside his desk and guided him through each word, celebrating when he got it right, gently correcting when he didn't. I saw myself in that interaction. Not as I was now, but as I had been during those years of cleaning offices. Overlooked. Underestimated. Forgotten. But also, I saw myself as I was now. Someone who had learned to recognize her own worth and was helping others do the same. The journey from invisible to visible, from forgotten to remembered, from undervalued to appreciated, had taken years. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been false starts and setbacks and moments when giving up seemed like the sensible choice. But here I was. Still teaching, still learning, still growing. Still committed to the radical act of seeing people clearly, of recognizing potential in unexpected places, of believing that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. As I sat in that classroom, watching students discover their own capabilities, I realized that the most important lesson I had learned wasn't about literacy or education or career advancement. It was about worth. About the inherent value of every human being, regardless of their job or circumstances or the way others perceive them. For too many years, I had waited for other people to recognize my worth. I had cleaned offices and remained invisible because I believed that my value depended on external validation. But worth isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It exists independently of recognition or appreciation. Every person has stories worth hearing, potential worth nurturing, dreams worth supporting. The wealthy women in those Manhattan offices might never fully understand this. They might continue to see service providers as invisible, to mistake job titles for human value, to miss the rich stories that surround them every day. But that's their loss, not mine. I am Margaret Elena Santos. I was a teacher who became a cleaning lady who became a teacher again who became a program director who became a national education consultant. But more than any of those titles, I am a person whose worth isn't determined by what I do for work or how others perceive me. I am someone who has learned to see clearly, to value authentically, to believe in potential even when it's hidden beneath years of overlooked possibilities. And I am living proof that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. As I walked home that night through the familiar streets of Queens, I thought about all the people who might be listening to this story. People who feel invisible in their own lives. People who have been overlooked or underestimated or forgotten. I thought about the cleaning ladies and security guards and cab drivers and cashiers who make the world function but rarely receive recognition. I thought about the teachers and social workers and nurses who do essential work for modest pay. I thought about the students in classrooms across the country who are still discovering their own worth. To all of them, I want to say this: you matter. Your story matters. Your dreams matter. You are more than your job, more than other people's perceptions, more than your current circumstances. It may take time to find the people who see you clearly. It may take courage to claim your own worth. It may take patience to build the life you want. But it's possible. It's always possible. Because every person deserves to be seen. Every person deserves to be valued. Every person deserves the chance to become who they're meant to be. The years that followed the White House recognition were perhaps the most fulfilling of my entire life. The New York Adult Literacy Initiative had become a model program studied by educators across the globe. Delegations from other countries visited our centers to learn about our approach. We had trained hundreds of instructors, reached thousands of students, and changed countless lives. But for me, the real measure of success wasn't in the statistics or the awards or the recognition. It was in the individual moments of transformation I witnessed every day. There was Esperanza, a grandmother from Guatemala who had cleaned houses for 30 years without being able to read a single word in English. At 68, she finally learned to read the letters her daughter sent from college. The day she read one aloud to our class, her voice trembling with pride, I remembered why I had never given up on education. There was Robert, a former construction worker who lost his job due to a back injury. At 55, he thought his life was over until he discovered he had a gift for mathematics. He went on to become a tutor in our program, helping other men his age who felt lost and purposeless after losing their careers. There was Fatima, a young mother who had fled Somalia with nothing but her children and her determination to build a better life. She learned English in our evening classes while working multiple jobs during the day. 2 years later, she started her own catering business, specializing in traditional Somali cuisine. She now employs 4 other immigrant women from our program. Each story reminded me that education isn't just about reading and writing and arithmetic. It's about hope. It's about dignity. It's about the fundamental human right to grow and change and become more than you were yesterday. But perhaps the most significant development in my personal life came 3 years after the White House ceremony. I was teaching my usual Tuesday evening class when a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Elena, my first student from the library volunteer program years ago, was standing there with a young woman who looked remarkably like her. "Teacher Margaret," Elena said, her English now fluent and confident. "I want you to meet my granddaughter, Carmen. She just graduated from Columbia University with her master's degree in education. She wants to be a teacher, just like you." Carmen stepped forward, and I could see Elena's determination in her bright eyes, along with something else, the confidence that comes from growing up knowing that education is possible, that dreams are achievable, that your story matters. "My grandmother has told me so much about you," Carmen said. "How you helped her believe she could learn. How you saw her potential when no one else did. I want to do that for other people." As I shook Carmen's hand, I thought about the ripple effects of one moment of recognition, one act of seeing someone clearly. Elena had learned to read, which had made it possible for her to help her children with homework, which had inspired them to value education, which had led to Carmen pursuing her teaching degree. One conversation in a library classroom had created a teacher who would touch hundreds of lives in the years to come. "We need teachers like you," I told Carmen. "Teachers who understand that every student has a story worth knowing, potential worth nurturing." Carmen joined our program as an instructor 6 months later. Watching her work with students, seeing Elena's pride when she visited the classroom, I was reminded once again of the profound interconnectedness of human experience. We are all teachers and students, all capable of seeing and being seen, all part of each other's journey toward becoming who we're meant to be. As I entered my 10th year with the literacy program, I began to think about legacy, not the kind of legacy measured in awards or newspaper articles, but the living legacy of lives changed and potential realized. I was approaching my 70th birthday, and while I felt more energetic and purposeful than I had in decades, I also knew that my time in formal leadership roles was limited. I started working with Carmen and Jennifer and the other regional directors to document our methods and approaches. We created training materials that could be used by literacy programs nationwide. We established partnerships with universities to ensure that our student-centered philosophy would continue to influence new generations of adult educators. Most importantly, I began mentoring a new generation of program leaders, people like Carmen who understood viscerally what it meant to be overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. They would carry forward the mission of seeing clearly, of recognizing potential in the most unlikely places, of believing in the capacity of every human being to grow and learn and transform. One morning, as I was preparing for a conference call with our regional directors, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, though I hadn't heard it in almost 10 years. "Margaret? This is Victoria Ashford. I hope you remember me." How could I forget the woman who had changed my life by asking a simple question, "Have you worked in cleaning long?" "Of course I remember you, Victoria. How wonderful to hear your voice. I've been following your work over the years," she said. "Reading the articles, seeing the news coverage. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." We talked for over an hour, catching up on the years since we'd last spoken regularly. Victoria had retired from her foundation but remained active in philanthropy. She had grandchildren now, and she spoke of them with the same warmth she had once shown me when I was just a cleaning lady who watered her plants. "Margaret," she said toward the end of our conversation, "I've been thinking about writing a book about the importance of seeing people clearly, of recognizing potential in unexpected places. I'd like to feature your story prominently. Would you be willing to collaborate on it?" "A book? About the power of recognition, the importance of human dignity, the transformative potential of education. About the thousands of people like me who walk through the world invisible until someone takes the time to really see them. Yes, I said without hesitation. I think that's exactly the kind of book the world needs. We spent the next year working together on Invisible No More, the power of recognition in transforming lives. Victoria interviewed dozens of my former students, colleagues, and family members. She visited our literacy centers, observed classes, and listened to countless stories of transformation. The book was published 2 years later, just as I was celebrating my 45th year in education and my 12th year with the literacy program. It became a bestseller, not because of my story alone, but because it resonated with the millions of people who had ever felt invisible, overlooked, or undervalued. The publicity tour was surreal. I found myself on television talk shows and radio programs, speaking to audiences who hung on every word as I described the journey from invisibility to recognition, from cleaning offices to changing lives. But the most meaningful moment came during a book signing in Queens, not far from the apartment building where I had lived during those long years of feeling invisible. The line of people waiting to meet me stretched around the block. They weren't celebrities or politicians or wealthy donors. They were working people. Immigrants. Single mothers. Retirees. Former students. Current teachers. One woman, about my age, approached the signing table with tears in her eyes. "I clean offices," she said quietly. "I've been doing it for 20 years. I used to be a nurse in the Philippines, but my credentials weren't recognized here. I felt invisible for so long. Your story, it gives me hope." I signed her book with a special message: "You are not invisible. You never were. Your story matters, your dreams matter, and it's never too late to reclaim who you're meant to be." As she walked away, clutching the book to her chest, I thought about all the people still waiting to be seen, still hoping for recognition, still believing that their best days might be ahead of them rather than behind them. The success of the book led to even more speaking engagements, more opportunities to share the message that every person has value, that potential exists in the most unexpected places, that transformation is always possible. But as had happened before when success threatened to pull me away from the work I loved most, I made a conscious decision to stay grounded in the classroom. No matter how many interviews I gave or conferences I spoke at, I continued to teach 2 nights a week, continued to work directly with students who were just beginning their own journeys toward recognition and self-worth. One evening, about a year after the book's publication, I was working with a new student named William. He was a 75-year-old man who had worked his entire life as a janitor in hospitals. He had never learned to read beyond a 2nd grade level, but he had recently become a great-grandfather and wanted to read bedtime stories to his great-granddaughter. As we worked through a simple picture book together, William stopped and looked up at me. "Teacher Margaret," he said, "I seen your book in the store. I can't read it yet, but my daughter told me what it's about. She says you used to clean offices like I cleaned hospitals." "That's right, William. For 15 years. And now you're famous. You're on the TV and everything." I smiled at his wonder. "I'm not famous because of what I used to do or what I do now. I'm known because I learned that every person's story matters. Including yours." William nodded thoughtfully. "My great-granddaughter, she's only 2, but she's smart as a whip. I want her to know that her great-granddaddy could read to her. I want her to be proud of me." "She already is proud of you," I told him. "But learning to read will be a gift you give to both of you." 6 months later, William read Goodnight Moon to little Amelia at her 2nd birthday party. His daughter sent me a video of the moment, William's weathered hands holding the book, his voice strong and clear as he read each word, Amelia's eyes wide with wonder as her great-grandfather's voice brought the story to life. It was more beautiful to me than any award ceremony or television interview. It was the real purpose of everything I had worked for, one person discovering they were capable of more than they had ever imagined possible. As I approached my 75th birthday, I began to think seriously about retirement. Not from teaching, I couldn't imagine ever completely stopping, but from the administrative responsibilities that had grown over the years. The New York Adult Literacy Initiative was thriving under the leadership of Carmen and Jennifer and dozens of other talented educators who had been trained in our methods. I announced my intention to step down as director at the program's annual conference. The room was filled with teachers, students, administrators, and community leaders from across the state. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces of people whose lives had been touched by education, I thought about the long journey that had brought me to this moment. 15 years ago, I was invisible. I cleaned offices in Manhattan towers, surrounded by successful, powerful people who never bothered to learn my name or my story. I felt forgotten, overlooked, without value or potential. But one person saw me. One person asked about my story and listened to the answer. One person recognized that I was more than what I appeared to be on the surface. That recognition didn't just change my life. It changed thousands of lives. Every student who has learned to read in our programs, every teacher who has joined our mission, every family whose life has been transformed by education, all of it began with one moment of being truly seen. Today, I'm stepping down as director not because the work is finished, but because it has grown beyond any one person. The teachers in this room, the students in our classrooms, the communities that support our programs, you are all part of a movement that will continue long after I'm gone. Remember this: every person you encounter has a story worth hearing, potential worth nurturing, dreams worth supporting. Your job as educators isn't just to teach reading or math or English. Your job is to see people clearly, to recognize their worth, to help them become who they're meant to be. The standing ovation went on for several minutes. But more meaningful to me were the individual conversations afterward, former students telling me how education had changed their lives, teachers sharing how our approach had transformed their practice, community leaders expressing gratitude for the impact our programs had had on their neighborhoods. Carmen, who would be taking over as the new director, pulled me aside before I left that evening. "You know, I've been thinking about something," she said. "My grandmother Elena always says that you saved her life when you taught her to read. But I think it was the other way around. I think she saved yours." Carmen was right, of course. Elena, and Marcus, and Rosa, and David, and all the hundreds of students I had worked with over the years, they had saved me as much as I had helped them. They had reminded me of my own worth, my own potential, my own capacity for growth and transformation. Teaching them had taught me the most important lesson of all: we all need to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized for who we really are. And we all have the power to offer that gift of recognition to others. In my retirement from administrative duties, I continued to teach 2 evenings a week. I wrote articles about adult education, consulted with programs around the world, and spoke at conferences about the transformative power of seeing people clearly. But mostly, I simply lived my life with intention and purpose, aware every day of the profound interconnectedness of human experience, grateful for the journey that had taken me from invisible to visible, from forgotten to remembered, from undervalued to appreciated. On quiet Sunday mornings, I would sometimes take walks through my old neighborhood in Queens, past the apartment building where I had lived during those long years of cleaning offices. The streets looked the same, but I saw them differently now. Every person I passed, the elderly man walking his dog, the young mother pushing a stroller, the teenager carrying a basketball, had a story worth knowing, potential worth recognizing. Sometimes I would take the subway into Manhattan, not to clean offices but simply to remember. I would walk past the gleaming towers where I had once worked, thinking about the wealthy women inside who had hired my services but never bothered to learn my story. I felt no anger toward them anymore, only sadness for the missed opportunities, the connections that could have been made, the richness of human experience they had chosen to overlook. Their inability to see me clearly had been their loss, not mine. Because I had learned the most important truth of all: worth doesn't depend on recognition. It exists whether others see it or not. Every person has value, every person has potential, every person deserves to be acknowledged for who they truly are. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find people who see us clearly, who ask about our stories and listen to our answers, who recognize our potential and help us reclaim our dreams. When that happens, it doesn't just change one life. It creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine, touching people we'll never meet, inspiring transformations we'll never witness, contributing to a world where being truly seen is not the exception but the expectation. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever wondered if anyone truly sees you for who you are? Have you ever doubted your own worth because others failed to recognize it? If any of this sounds familiar, know that you're not alone. And know that your worth isn't dependent on other people's recognition. It exists whether they see it or not. The question is, do you see it? Do you believe in your own potential? Do you have the courage to claim your own value? I hope my story helps you answer yes. Because the world needs what you have to offer. The world needs your unique perspective, your individual talents, your particular way of making things better. Don't wait for permission to matter. Don't wait for others to validate your worth. Don't wait for perfect circumstances to start becoming who you're meant to be. Start now. Start today. Start by seeing yourself clearly and believing in your own potential. Because you matter. You've always mattered. And it's time the world, and you, recognize that truth. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Like this video and subscribe to help it reach others who might need to hear it. Your support makes it possible for me to keep sharing these stories, to keep opening my heart, to keep reminding people of their own worth. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. And thank you for having the courage to see yourself.